welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading my short fiction to make your pandemic palatable. I came late to STARGATE SG-1 because, for the same reason actually why I came late to Highlander the series back in the day, because the story itself, the movie that the TV show was based on, was incredibly terrible. The movie Stargate was just awful and I hated it, so I had no interest in watching Stargate SG-1. After a while, though, I had heard good things about it from people who'd seen it, and so in its sixth season, when it shifted to the Sci-Fi Channel from Showtime, I decided to watch an episode because John Billingsley was in it. He played Dr. Phlox on Star Trek Enterprise, and he guest starred in an episode. I watched it, I enjoyed it, I kept watching it, I completely fell for it, and became a huge fan. In 2015, I was finally able to contribute to the Stargate universe. Was 2015? No, it was 2014. Haha. Time has no meaning. 2014. I don't have a copy of the book, which surprised me. I usually do, but I contributed to the Far Horizons anthology, which was the first of several anthologies that Fandemonium Books did in the Stargate franchise. I also did a novel called Kali's Wrath, which came out in 2016. And in 2017, 2018, I forget, I did a second short story called Sunbreaker, which was in Homeworlds. What I'm going to read for you now is the story that appeared in Far Horizons. It actually specifically takes place between the third and fourth season. At the end of the third season of SG-1, Carter and O'Neill and Teal'c were trapped on a planet, and Earth's Stargate was gone, so they couldn't come home. That was at the end of the third season in the episode Nemesis. At the start of the fourth season, which was called Small Victories, it was like a week later or 2 weeks later, I forget, a certain span of time later, and they had installed a new Stargate. And finally were able to bring the three of them home. What was interesting, though, was when they came through the gate, Carter's hair had grown a lot more than could be accounted for by the amount of time they were gone. It was like shaggy, almost. Very non-regulation for the Air Force, too. And Teal'c had grown a soul patch, which was dyed blonde. This was never explained. O'Neill, by the way, looked exactly the same. So, now, part of this was due to external factors. Amanda Tapping had grown her hair out over the hiatus, and for whatever reason, Christopher Judge decided to grow a soul patch and dye it blonde. And considering he had to shave his head constantly for the role, I guess they just let him get away with it. The soul patch did go away eventually, thank goodness. But they never did explain how that happened in so short a time. I decided to take that on in my story, which is called Time Keeps on Slippin'. For Major Samantha Carter, it was always a question of multitasking. Under normal circumstances, it would be the easiest thing in the world to keep track of three things at once. Even if those three things were remembering how much time had elapsed, keeping herself alive while under heavy fire, and paying attention to the vibration of the ship around her. The latter was particularly important, as those vibrations would increase when the ship in question, the Asgard vessel Balistner, was touching the stratosphere. Complicating the matters, though, was the second part. Even at the height of the Gulf War, she'd never been under fire quite like this. Hundreds and hundreds of mechanical, spider-like creatures that Thor of the Asgard referred to as replicators were skittering toward her. By her side were Colonel Jack O'Neill and Teal'c. The sound of metal on metal from the replicators' movements, the mechanical humming of the creatures, both sounding 100 times over, combined with the hum of the active Stargate behind her, and the reports of two SPAS-12s and her own GAU-5A, all firing over and over again on semi-automatic to keep the replicators at bay. The close quarters of the chamber on the Balistner made it as loud as anything Carter had ever experienced, the cacophony making it nigh impossible to concentrate enough to focus on one thing, let alone all three. Somehow, O'Neill managed to shout over all that, "Carter! Not yet, sir!" They had transported the Stargate from Cheyenne Mountain to the Balistner, and Teal'c had manually dialed it to another world. She had already sent the stasis pod with the very ill Thor through the Stargate. Now she was waiting for the right moment for them to join him. soon enough for the friction of the atmospheric entry to aid the explosives Teal'c had planted on the hull in destroying the ship, but not so long that the selfsame friction would burn off the explosives. Then O'Neill would set off the detonator, and they'd step through the Stargate to safety, while the Balliskner was destroyed, along with all the replicators. She hoped. The vibration of the deck plates increased, and the right amount of time had elapsed, and Carter really hoped that the former wasn't because of the thousands and thousands of replicators moving across the deck. Now! O'Neill stopped firing and pulled the detonator out of a pouch, Teal'c shifting his field of weapons fire to cover the colonel. He pushed the button and cried, "Let's go!" All three of them dove through the Stargate, Teal'c pushing Thor's floating stasis pod ahead of himself. Carter did a right shoulder roll that would have made Sergeant Nidaner back at the academy proud, but she still wrenched her shoulder as the ground was far lower than expected. Most Stargates had a ramp or stairs that were buried partway into the ground, but this one was apparently off the ground, but without easy access. When they went home, they were going to need to take a big step up to go through. The wormhole closed with a swish, and Carter looked around as she scrambled to her feet, favoring her right shoulder as she did so. She saw a large plateau with several trees and bushes and a small lake. Thor's pod floated in the air near the DHD. In the distance, she could only see mountaintops covered in snow. The sky overhead was full of clouds, but the sky over the horizon was oddly, well, blurry. "Everyone okay?" O'Neill asked, yanking his safety goggles off his face. With bullets and blown replicator bits flying all over the place, the eye protection had been necessary on the Balliskner. "I am fine, O'Neill," Teal'c said. After taking his own goggles off, he removed the magazine from his SPAS-12 and replaced it with a fresh one. "Me too, sir." Carter looked over at the Jaffa. "Teal'c, where are we?" P4X-234. I chose an address that could be manually dialed with the greatest speed and efficiency. "Good thinking." O'Neill headed to the DHD. "Sir, I wouldn't bother dialing home." Carter took off her own goggles before gingerly shouldering her rifle. "Remember, we just used the main Earth gate. It'll take at least a day or two for them to get the beta gate out of storage and install it." O'Neill blew out a breath. "Right." The second gate that Carter and O'Neill had found in Antarctica had been in storage ever since those rogue NID agents were caught using it. "Maybe the Asgard will come and fetch Thor and give us a lift. Meantime, I really hope that P4X-234 is a friendly planet." "It should be." Carter, though, was dubious even as she said it. "Teal'c, are you sure that's where you dialed?" Teal'c sounded more than a little nonplussed. "Indeed." "I'm sorry, I don't mean to doubt you, but well, the reports SG-4 made last year were that the gate was on an island. This is on a mountain." Carter looked around. "But this area matches the description perfectly otherwise. The lake, the trees, the bushes. Captain Zarelli even reported that the water in the lake was drinkable and the fruits on those bushes were edible." "Good," O'Neill said, heading for the lake, "because I'm starving and thirsty. Carter, did SG-4 find any people?" Carter shook her head. "No, sir, but it was just a big ocean all around. For a land like this to just show up around it would take millennia of continental drift." O'Neill was cupping the water from the lake into his hands. I needed that. "All right, let's take a few minutes to relax. I, for one, could use a break." Carter smiled. "Well, sir, you did want to go fishing." With a snort, O'Neill fell more than sat on the ground next to one of the bushes. He was still in the civilian clothes he'd been wearing when Thor beamed him to the Balliskner. They had all been on vacation, while Dr. Daniel Jackson recovered from an appendectomy, but then the crisis with Thor and the replicators happened. Her smile falling, Carter added, "I just hope the Asgard ship was completely destroyed." "Not a hell of a lot we can do about it now." He picked a few berries off the bush and popped them in his mouth. Tastes like boysenberry." "Well, that's good," Carter said. O'Neill shook his head. "Actually, I hate boysenberry, so please, have as much as you want." He pointed at the bush. "Let's all catch our breath, eat, drink, and be merry, and then we'll do some recon." Carter and Teal'c both sat alongside O'Neill. The berries didn't taste anything like boysenberry to Carter, but she didn't contradict the colonel. As for Teal'c, he bit one, swallowed it very gingerly, and then intoned, "My symbiote allows me to go many days without food." "You don't like boysenberry either, huh?" O'Neill sighed. "All right, since you're not eating, Teal'c, you start the recon." Clambering to her feet, Carter said, "I'll go too, sir. I want to examine the area around here, see why it's so different from what SG-4 reported." O'Neill threw up his hands. "Yeah, sure, you betcha," he said in the same bad Minnesota accent he'd used to try to convince her to come fishing with him. With a chuckle, Carter followed Teal'c as they headed toward the edge of the clearing. But when Teal'c got to the edge of the grass line, he suddenly disappeared. "Teal'c!" Carter was only 2 steps behind him. When she passed the edge of the grass, however, Teal'c was nowhere to be found, but the sky was no longer blurry. Instead, there was a certain amount of cloud cover. On the ground next to her were Teal'c's rifle and Zetnikitel. "Sir," she started as she turned around, but when she looked back at the plateau, O'Neill wasn't moving. The colonel was in the midst of getting up from the ground, but he looked frozen in place. "Colonel!" O'Neill didn't respond, didn't move, didn't budge. Carter started to move back toward him, and couldn't. It was like there was an invisible wall, or, more likely, a force field, keeping her out of the plateau. Cadet Samantha Carter, who graduated the academy at the top of her class, would have been utterly baffled by the current situation, convinced that someone was playing a trick, or that perhaps she was going mad. Major Samantha Carter, though, had spent the last 3 years as part of SG-1, and not only wasn't baffled, but was pretty sure she had figured it all out already. To prove it, she bent down and picked up Teal'c's rifle. The SPAS-12's magazine was completely empty. He had just reloaded it when it came through the gate. There was no way he could have shot all those rounds, even on semi-automatic, in the 2 seconds between his disappearance and Carter going through that same apparent force shield. For whatever reason, time was moving at a far greater rate away from the Stargate than it was on the plateau. The colonel was moving, but relative to the speed at which Carter was now moving, it was like he was standing still. Teal'c could have been there for hours before moving away, and it would have appeared to Carter as if he'd just disappeared. She noticed something else on Teal'c's rifle. Blood. Looking down on the ground, she saw more blood. The trail continued down the mountain. Carter didn't have Teal'c's tracking ability, but even she could follow that. She turned to make one more attempt to get through the force shield, even shooting her GAU-5A at it, but the rounds just ricocheted off, and she stopped for fear of being hit with one. If Teal'c was hurt, her first priority was to find him and try to rescue him. If she was lucky, O'Neill wouldn't have finished getting up by the time she got back. She hoisted both Teal'c's rifle and her own, wincing at the pain in her right shoulder, and kept the Zetnikitel in her right hand. The Zat had been of no use against the replicators, but she figured it was best for her primary weapon to be a non-lethal one, at least to start. Eventually, the blood trail thinned to the point of uselessness, but by then she was in sight of a very large city in the valley between this mountain and the next one over. There were no other signs of civilization, though she did see disturbingly large animal tracks here and there on the ground. Even as she worked her way down, so many thoughts vied for attention in her head, and just as she had on Thor's ship, she kept them all going in her mind at once. The astrophysicist in her wondered how this planet could possibly function, with one section of it moving at a different rate of time. She was no geologist, but she imagined the stresses alone would tear the mantle apart. The soldier in her thought back over the battle on Thor's ship, hoping that the explosives Teal'c placed on the ballistator were enough to destroy the ship and the replicators, thus saving Earth. She had a very real concern that the plan hadn't worked, and by the time Stargate Command got the Beta Gate up and running, they'd be going back to an Earth that was overrun by replicators. The space nerd in her, the one who asked her parents for a telescope on her 5th birthday, was once again grooving on the notion of walking on alien soil. It had been 3 years since she set foot on Abydos after going through the gate for the first time, and the thrill of placing her boots on a planet that wasn't Earth had yet to diminish. She truly hoped it never would. As she got closer, she noticed that the far end of the city had a huge industrial complex that was powered by 4 massive engines, all of which had what appeared to be geothermal taps. Also, the entire city, except for that complex, was surrounded by a stone wall. The buildings inside seemed to be made of refined metal for the most part, and Carter found it an interesting juxtaposition of styles between the architecture of the wall versus that of the city. She spied a metal portcullis embedded in the stone wall, guarded by 2 men, both of whom were as bald as Teal'c, and also had little tufts of blonde hair on their chins. Carter was amused by the fact that these people, on a planet billions of miles from Earth, had also developed the soul patch as a fashion statement. They were armed, so Carter figured it was best not to escalate matters by showing off her own weaponry. She holstered the Zap. The men held up their weapons, which looked like Civil War-era pistols. "Halt!" one cried. Carter held up both hands. "My name is Major Samantha Carter. I come from a place called Earth. I came through the Stargate, and I'm looking for a friend of mine who I believe was brought here hurt." Looking at each other briefly, one of the guards said, "Describe your friend." "Taller than me, bald, with a golden symbol of a serpent on his forehead." Now the guards nodded at each other. "The KRAD victim." The other removed a small device from his pocket and put it to his throat. "Hem 10, this is Hem 15. We need an escort to the hospital." A tinny voice sounded over the small speakers of the device. "Acknowledged, Hem 10. Escort will arrive shortly." "Wait here, please," the guard said as he pocketed the device. "Someone will take you to your friend in the hospital." Carter nodded. The other one asked, "You said Stargate? Is that what you call the ring in the oasis on the mountain?" Allowing herself a small smile, Carter replied, "Yes. We use it to travel to other worlds. There's an entire network of them." She decided to venture a question of her own. "What's a KRAD?" "A vicious beast that roams the countryside. They're why our ancestors built this wall, in fact. Your friend saved the lives of 2 idiots who were out trying to capture one of the beasts without a hunting license." "Yeah, Macri took those 2 in right off," the other guard said with a chuckle. "They thought your friend was one of us on account of the lack of hair." Speaking of which, with hair like that, what do you do exactly?" Carter blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Well, your hair's way too long for you to be a menial, and you're too long for a tradesperson, and it would need to be longer for you to be a scientist." Suddenly, Carter wished Daniel was here. He would be fascinated by the contradictory architecture and would probably have a theory about why they had sophisticated communications technology but ancient firearms. Plus, this whole adjust your hair length to fit your job thing was bizarre to say the least. Another man with a shaved head and a blonde soul patch stood on the other side of the portcullis. One of Carter's guards said, "This woman is to be taken to the KRAD victim at the hospital. She's one of the ones he said would come for him." Carter smiled. Teal'c must have told them about her and O'Neill both. A guard pulled another device out of his pocket and pressed a button, causing the portcullis to rise. "Come with me, please." The streets of the city were made of cobblestone, and most people walked, though she saw a few wagon-wheeled carriages that were powered by tiny batteries. Apparently, they never developed the combustion engine, but went straight to electronics, and skipped over the notion of radial tires or asphalt. The hospital was a surprisingly small building. There were no subdivided rooms, but simply one huge hall filled with beds. It took no time at all to pick out Teal'c, as he was larger than anyone present, and the only one with the gold symbol of Apophis on his forehead. While the patients had a variety of hair types, Carter noticed that the people walking around the hospital all seemed to have either crew cuts, these appeared to be maintenance personnel, or a kind of shaggy hair that hung near their necks. Based on what the guard said, these were the doctors and nurses. One such, with shaggy black hair, was standing by Teal'c. "I really wish," she was saying, "that we could study you in more depth, but that would require dissection, and I don't think even you could recover from that." "Indeed." He looked up at her approach. "Major Carter." "Teal'c, are you okay?" "I am fine." The doctor smiled. "He's more than fine. I'm Teal'c. Anyone else who was as badly wounded by the KRAD as Teal'c here would be dead by now. The blood loss alone would have done it, given how long it took them to carry him down the mountain." "I'm glad you're okay, Teal'c, but we need to get back up to the mountain and figure out a way to get through the force shield." "Actually," the doctor said, "you should talk to my sister. She's the chief scientist of the city, and she can probably help you, and you can probably help her." Teal'c was free to go, and Z'Rael's workday was done, so she led them to her sister's office, which was only a few streets away. This was another building with very few divisions in the room, but many desks. Apparently they weren't big on private office spaces around here. Z'Rael brought them over to a woman with similar features, as well as the same color hair, also down to her shoulders, but much curlier. The woman in question was holding what looked like a laptop monitor without a keyboard, operating it by touching the screen. "Sam Carter, Teal'c, this is Tan Narda. Narda, this Teal'c is the patient I was telling you about." Narda frowned at her sister. "I thought you said he was attacked by a KRAD. He's looking mighty healthy." "I am a Jaffa," Teal'c said. "Which means he heals fast," Carter added with a smile. "Unfortunately, it's just him. If it had been me who was attacked by the KRAD, I'd probably need a lot more of your sister's help." "Carter here," Z'Rael said, "is a scientist. Astrophysicist, actually." Carter pointed at the screen of her device. "That looks like a schematic of the machine on the outskirts of the city." Narda nodded. "It is. What's wrong with it? The short version? It's broken. Carter peered more closely at it. Looks like the geothermal taps are working beyond their capacity. Now Narda looked and regarded Carter with appreciation. Okay, when I saw your hair, I just assumed Zarael was joking about you being a scientist. Chuckling, Carter said, sorry, where I come from, hair doesn't indicate job. Teal'c did his trademark head tilt. That is not entirely correct, Major Carter. The Air Force to which you belong requires hair be a certain length, and Jaffa tradition holds that first primes must remain hairless. Nodding to concede the point, Carter said, still, I can be a scientist with hair like this. What does the engine do? Provide power? I wish. No, this thing sucks up all our power, but without it, the entire planet would blow up. Carter blinked. The tectonic stress from operating in two different time streams. Now Narda frowned. Excuse me? I mean, yes, tectonic stress, but we haven't been able to determine why it's happening. Is it localized under the mountain where the Stargate, the ring, is? Narda set the device down on her desk. You can't possibly have known that from looking at this schematic. No, but I know where the temporal displacement is. Something is causing time to slow down on this planet, except for the area around the Stargate. We had a team come to this world a year ago, but then the Stargate was on an island. Shaking her head, Narda said, the best geological evidence we have is that this mountain has been here for 2,000 years. But there have been a lot of tectonic shifts in those 2,000 years, and the ocean has receded considerably, but... She shook her head. How can time move at a different rate in one section of the planet? Naturally, it can't. But there are lots of technologies that we barely understand that have done stranger things. We've seen devices that can move to alternate dimensions that Zarael held up a hand. I hate to interrupt, but I need to get home. I assume I can leave these two in your care, Narda? Try to take them away from me, Narda said with a grin. Carter, you may be the answer to our prayers. The machine has been able to stave off the tectonic stresses. Without it, the entire continent would collapse, and possibly the entire planet would be destroyed, but we haven't been able to figure out the cause. Carter nodded and glanced at Teal'c. I might be able to help you with that, if you can help us with our problem. We need to get through to the Stargate. Oh, we gave up hope of getting through to the Oasis decades ago. But it's been long enough that some fresh eyes might actually help. Narda put her left hand over her heart. I promise that I will aid you in your quest if you will help us in ours. Matching the gesture, assuming it to be the equivalent of shaking hands on a deal, Carter said, I promise to do likewise. As do I, Teal'c said without the gesture. For the next several hours, Narda showed Carter the workings of the machine, as well as the geological scans of the mountain and its environs. Eventually, a man who resembled Narda and Zarael both, but had a shaved head and a blonde soul patch, entered the office. Sister, it's time to go home. Narda closed her eyes and sighed. Macri, you really don't have to escort me home every night. As long as you're receiving death threats, I tend to disagree. Teal'c, who had been eating a meal Narda had delivered to the office, rose to his feet. You are one of the officers who arrested the men I rescued. Macri nodded. I'm Tan Nacri. My other sister tells me you two came through the ring? Indeed. Please explain your reference to death threats. It's nothing, Narda said before Macri could answer. It's not nothing, Macri said in a long-suffering tone that reminded Carter a great deal of some of her arguments with her brother, Mark. There's a fraction of people who believe that the machine should be dismantled, that it's consuming too much power for not enough gain. They're idiots. The earthquakes that will result from turning the machine off will destroy half the city. Narda shook her head. I'm tempted to turn it off just so they can see how catastrophic it would be. Macri frowned. Please tell me you're not serious. Narda regarded her brother with amusement. I'm not serious. Entirely. Then she looked at Carter. There's an inn nearby, but I suspect that you don't have any currency that we take, given that you're from another world and all. However, I have an extra room in my dwelling, so the pair of you can stay with me in my guest room. Actually, Macri said, why doesn't Teal'c stay with me? I assume you two will be giggling about the machine at all hours, and based on the glazed look that Teal'c had when I came in here, he might enjoy staying with a peace officer more than he would with a pair of scientists. Teal'c bowed his head. Your offer is greatly appreciated, Tan Macri. I accept. And I accept your offer, Carter said with a grateful smile. The next several weeks were at once fantastic and frustrating for Carter. The machine was a device of exquisite design. Narda was not the designer. That was her mentor, a now deceased scientist named Yor Bestra. But she was the one who had maintained it, and who had made many improvements to it over the years. it was only staving off the inevitable. With each passing year, it required more power to keep the tectonic stress and volcanic activity in check. Still, it did its job superlatively. What frustrated her was an inability to figure out a way to stop the tectonic stress permanently, or a way to get through the force shield. The more time passed, the more the mountain's ever-changing geological structure, due to its moving at a different rate of time than the rest of the world, the more unstable it all became. Equally frustrating were the constant barrage of protests against the use of the machine. Carter was mostly exposed to it in the form of emails that were sent to Narda, as well as flyers and graffiti she saw on the walls of the city. She couldn't actually read them, but Narda translated, albeit bitterly. Teal'c had been serving as an unofficial advisor to the peace officers, showing them some Jaffa techniques in hand-to-hand combat that they had never developed here. Meanwhile, Carter had been letting her hair grow out so she'd fit in more with Narda and her co-workers at the Science Institute. One day, Marta, Macri, and Zarael all had dinner together, leaving Carter and Teal'c to share a meal alone for the first time in weeks. "Have you made any progress in penetrating the force shield, Major Carter?" Carter shook her head as she popped a bit of ferrac chop into her mouth. "None. Most of the technology on this world is geared toward information storage and communications. Some of that has bled over into their other technology, like powering their version of cars, but they've developed very little tech that directly affects the environment. Most of their tools are mechanical. They've never invented air conditioning or heaters, but those touchscreen devices can store 5 times as much information as the mainframe in Cheyenne Mountain." Realizing she was burying the lead, she chuckled. "You know, by now, Colonel O'Neill would have interrupted me and made some kind of strangling noise and told me to get to the point already. It has been my observation that you do reach the crux of the matter eventually." She held up the mug of fruit juice in mock toast. "Well, thanks for that. Anyhow, the crux of the matter is that I need to find some kind of wave modulator and a frequency jammer that I can fine-tune to try to disrupt the force shield. I've actually been working on the design for that, but they don't have the manufacturing capability here to do it." Carter shook her head. "The hilarious part is I can only design it because the computer here is so good. The modifications are based on how the wormhole interacted with the solar flare when we got sent back to 1969, and the studies they made at Area 51 of the quantum mirror before General Hammond destroyed it." Teal'c nodded. "Impressive." "Not really." Carter blew out a breath. "Right now it's all theoretical. I don't have the means to build what I need. We're just barely earning our keep here helping the Tans. That's one good thing. I've been able to help increase the efficiency of the machine. Though I wish we had a real engineer here to give it a once-over. This is way out of my league." "I have found, Major Carter, that your league encompasses more than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe." She shook her head and finished off her meal. "The good news is, we have plenty of time. I went up to the mountain yesterday, and the Colonel hasn't even finished getting up off the ground yet." Carter was sitting at the desk that Narda had issued her, right next to Narda's own, in the Science Institute, when the large monitor attached to the ceiling came to life. Glancing over at one of the other scientists, Carter asked, "What's that?" Level 1's the council session," the scientist said, sounding bored. "The articles of law state that all such sessions have to be broadcast so people can be aware of how the council functions. Mostly it just shows us how incredibly boring council sessions are." It didn't take long for Carter to come to a similar conclusion to that of her colleague. But then governmental procedure had never held any interest for her. She came from a military family, where you followed orders handed down through the chain of command. Carter generally preferred the simplicity of a briefing to the tedium of a meeting. For one thing, she had yet to encounter a military operation that was ever in any way improved by a politician's getting involved. From that congressman during the Gulf War who decided to go on a fact-finding tour that included Carter's unit and nearly got himself killed in the process, to Senator Robert Kinsey's attempts to shut down the SGC 2 years ago. The only part of the broadcast that was in any way interesting was the fact that the politicians here wore their hair in top knots, making them all look vaguely like samurai from feudal Japan. However, one item on the agenda did grab her attention. A counselor named Kif Mirak asked to speak before the council on the subject of shutting down the machine. A majority of the remaining council agreed to let him speak, and then he stood. "I would like to urge the council to once again take a vote regarding the shutting down of the machine. I am aware that the last 10 votes have resulted in the resolution failing. However, the latest power consumption reports have been issued, which prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the machine itself is simply consuming more power with less impressive results. The fact of the matter is that the machine is a failure. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and it's been doing less and less well at greater and greater cost for years now. We need to shut it down and find a new way to stave off the geologic stresses that the Science Institute claims the machine is stopping. While we're at it, we should also pass a resolution to have an independent study commission to see if the machine is even necessary. The problem may well have been resolved by the machine, and the continued running of it is simply a boondoggle from the Science Institute to pour currency into their coffers to fix a problem that is already solved. Now, I don't wish to impugn the good names of the people in the Science Institute. I'm sure they're all fine, ethical people. But the fact of the matter is that we only have their word for the fact that the machine works. I think an independent study is necessary, which means shutting the machine down. I also believe that the two aliens should be detained until we can determine for certain where they came from and what their agenda is. I'm aware that the male alien saved the lives of 2 of our citizens at grave risk to himself, but I'm also aware of the fact that the power consumption of the machine has increased tenfold since the female alien's arrival and since she started consulting with the Science Institute. Carter just stared at the screen in confusion. The rate of increase of the machine's power consumption was consistent over the past several years. Yes, it had increased since Carter's arrival, but on the same track it had been before she started working with Narda. There was a vote on all 3 of Kif's resolutions. To Carter's relief, the only one that passed was the independent audit of the machine, which was also the only one of the 3 that was reasonable. However, she was disheartened to see that the resolutions to detain her and Teal'c and to shut down the machine only lost by 1 vote each. That night, both Teal'c and Macri, as well as 2 other peace officers, showed up to escort them home. At Carter's questioning look, Teal'c said, "There are crowds gathered in the plaza that sits between this location and Narda's dwelling." "And the death threats went through the roof after Kif's idiot speech this morning," Macri added. "As it is, we're taking the long way home." "What difference does it make?" Narda asked. "The resolutions didn't pass." Carter shook her head. Just because she didn't like politicians didn't mean she didn't recognize their tactics. It doesn't matter. The vote was very close, and Kif wouldn't have made that speech if he didn't know he could strike a nerve with it. We need to be careful. Narda sighed. "It's ridiculous!" Macri threw up her hands. "Narda, someone tried to kill you today!" Carter's eyes went wide. "What?" "Someone sent a bomb here to the Science Institute. We intercepted it in time, and with Teal'c's help, we were able to track who delivered it. They've been arrested, but the point is, someone sent a bomb here. This isn't just random people being cranky and sending you threatening mail. This is real." Teal'c said the explosive device was also accompanied by a note, which specifically said that Major Carter and myself should be put to death for crimes against the city. Closing her eyes, Narda let out a small, slow, steady breath. "All right, Macri, you win. I know you've wanted to put a permanent guard on Carter and me, and I've resisted, but I'm done with that." "With your permission," Teal'c said, "I would like to volunteer for that duty." Macri smiled. "I was already going to ask you to do it." Turning to Carter, Narda said, "I'm afraid I owe you an apology, Carter, and I also need to inform you of something I should have told you about." Frowning, Carter asked, "What's that, Narda?" She sighed. "In the sub-basement of the Institute, we have a repository of various devices, experiments, and the like. You might be able to modify 1 or more of them to make that wave modulator you've been tinkering with." Carter opened her mouth, but Narda put up both hands and cut her off. I know, I should have told you sooner, but, well, I thought it was a fool's errand, and besides, I was being selfish. I didn't want you to go back to the ring and leave us forever. You've been a blessing, Carter, and so have you, Teal'c. My brother has never gushed about anyone the way he gushes about you." Macri winced. "Narda, oh, stop it, Macri, you have been gushing. But it's not fair to either of you." Narda went back to her desk and took out a key square. "This will access the sub-basement. Now, I can't guarantee you'll find what you need, but I might." Carter accepted the key square. "Thank you, Narda, and thanks for your honesty. I'm just sorry it didn't come sooner." "Fine," Macri said impatiently. "Now, if we're done being all emotional, let's get you 2 home." They did indeed take a more roundabout route home, but when they turned a corner of a side street, there was a huge crowd of about 12 people, armed with various knives, plus 1 woman with a pistol. Standing at the center of the crowd was Kif. He appeared unarmed, which Carter unkindly figured was to cover his own ass in case things went badly. "Please, officer," Kif said, "do not stand in the way of justice." Macri actually sneered at Kif, a facial expression Carter applauded. "How exactly is mob rule justice, counselor?" "Your choice is simple, officer," Kiff said as if Macri hadn't spoken. "Hand the aliens over to us, or accept the consequences of refusing." "Well done, Counselor. You just officially threatened a peace officer. You are hereby bound by law." It was Kiff's turn to sneer. "Don't toy with me, officer. I'm a member of the council. You can't arrest me." "Actually, I can." Macri unholstered his weapon and pointed it at Kiff. "The articles of law specify no exemptions." "How naive." "Put the pistol down, officer." The other two officers also raised their pistols, and Teal'c held up his Zat, activating it to the ready position with an electronic click. Carter wished she had her weapon, but consultants of the Science Institute didn't generally walk around armed. Her rifle was back at Narda's dwelling. The woman with the pistol also raised hers and aimed it at Teal'c. "Put it down, alien." "Congratulations, citizen," Macri said to the woman. "You too are bound by law, along with the counselor. Anyone else want to join them?" "I haven't done anything wrong," the woman snarled. "The articles of law don't say anything about threatening aliens, or for that matter, shooting them." She cocked the weapon. Carter immediately dove for cover, grabbing Narda and pulling her to the ground as well. Teal'c, though, stood his ground. Macri cried, "No!" and leapt in front of Teal'c, just as the woman pulled the trigger. The other two officers also fired, with Teal'c firing the Zat. But Macri blocked Teal'c's shot, so he went rigid from the Zat's electronic shock, just as the bullet from the woman's pistol slammed into his chest. The woman also fell to the ground, bullet wounds in her chest and head from the other two officers. Kiff immediately turned and ran, and the rest of his mob panicked as well. The street was clear in moments, except for the bodies of Macri and the woman, as well as Narda, Carter, Teal'c, and the other two officers. One of the latter had a communication device at his throat, calling for medical aid. Teal'c was kneeling with Macri's body cradled in his arms. "He has no pulse." Narda just stared at Teal'c, seemingly unable to comprehend what Teal'c had just said. "You mean he's dead?" "Indeed. I am sorry, Narda. I did not wish for this to happen." It's not your fault, Teal'c." She turned toward the now empty street where Kiff had stood. "I know exactly who's to blame. Believe me." For Carter, it was always a question of multitasking. This time, though, it was to keep from falling asleep. She had spent days being questioned about the incident on the street, and attending hearings, and testifying in what was referred to as an inquest. However, when she wasn't actually testifying or answering questions, she was sitting in the gallery. All save for the barest maintenance had ceased on the machine pending the inquest results. Carter had been able to go to the sub-basement during one of the recesses and make a quick inventory. Now she was juggling in her head how to kit-bash some of the prototypes she found down there to do what her temporal waveform modulator was supposed to do, how they could reconfigure the geothermal taps, what to get Cassandra for her birthday, wondering whether or not O'Neill had gotten to his feet yet, hoping they consulted her notes at the SGC when they installed the beta gate, wondering who created the replicators in the first place, and wishing that Counselor Ren Impiz didn't talk in quite so dull a monotone. However, Carter did put all the various thoughts aside when Ren announced that the inquest was at an end and a decision had been reached. "While Counselor Kiff's methods were deplorable, we do not wish to condemn his beliefs solely because he expressed them poorly." Carter winced and gave a sad look to Narda and Zerael. Their brother was dead. That was a lot more than a poor expression of beliefs. "It is the ruling of this inquest that Kiff Mirak be stripped of his counselorship and imprisoned for a period of 12 years. It is the further ruling of this inquest that the audit of the machine will continue, and that an observer appointed by the Council will look over all the work that occurs involving the machine for the next 3 months and make regular reports to the Council. And it is the final ruling of this inquest that Tan Macri died a hero and will be honored in the plaza, and this day of every year shall be deemed Tan Macri Day in his memory." On the one hand, Carter was glad it was over, and glad that Macri was being honored for his sacrifice. On the other, she wasn't thrilled about the observer. She was even less thrilled the following morning when the observer arrived. He was one of the council, a man named Ain Anred. He approached Carter and Marta and said without preamble, "I just want you to know that I find this entire project a waste of time, and that I voted to have it shut down and to have you and that other awful alien put in chains. Your job is to convince me that I was wrong." Carter raised both eyebrows and sighed. "Great." The first day was primarily spent explaining what they were doing. 3 years of dumbing things down for the other members of SG-1 served Carter in good stead, as Ain had a sub-O'Neill level of understanding of anything scientific. And then at the end of it all, he asked, "Why can't we just shut the blessed thing off?" "Because," Narda said impatiently, "the only reason we're all still alive right now is because of this machine. If we turn it off, nothing will stop the collision of the tectonic plates, and the earthquakes will destroy the city." "And you have proof of this?" "We have mathematical models that conclusively..." Ain shook his head. "You misunderstand me, Tan Narda. I'm not speaking of the models you made up on your computers. I'm talking about physical proof. Actual, real-world proof." "Counselor," Carter said, "if I understand you correctly, the only way you'll believe that it'll cause earthquakes if we turn the machine off is if we actually turn it off and we get earthquakes?" "I believe, Alien, that you have summed it up nicely. Yes. I would like to propose that you shut the machine off for a day, so that we can see what it is actually doing." Narda stared at him. "That's insane." "Nonetheless, I think it would go a long way toward proving the machine's usefulness." "So, not satisfied with getting my brother killed, you and your fellow imbeciles want to get more dead bodies on your hands?" Ain put his hands on his hips. "I will not be spoken to in this way." Carter stepped between the two of them. "It doesn't matter. With respect, Counselor Ain, you don't have any authority to give us orders. Your sole purpose is to observe and report your findings to the rest of the Council, correct?" Reluctantly, Ain said, "That is so, yes, but I still think—" "I don't care what you think," Narda said. "Now I've answered all your stupid questions. From this point forth, you can just observe. If you have any questions, ask Carter. I'm done talking to you." With that, Narda left the room in a huff. "Her behavior will go in my report," Ain muttered to himself. Carter stared angrily at the counselor. "Her behavior is because she just lost her brother, to a person who used a lot of the same rhetoric you're using right now. Have a care, Alien. Your presence will not be tolerated forever." And then Ain followed Narda out of the office area. Shaking her head, Carter muttered, "Better not be forever." That night, she went back to Macri's former dwelling, which Zarael and Narda insisted that Teal'c and Carter use. As a peace officer's dwelling, it was more secure than most. Even with Kif disgraced, a lot of his attitudes still prevailed, as Carter's conversation with Ain had proven. Better to be safe. "Teal'c, I think I may have..." "What is that on your chin?" The Jaffa raised an eyebrow. Then Carter grinned as she realized that over the past few days, he had grown a soul patch and dyed it blonde, just like the peace officers. "You're growing one of those beard things?" Nodding, Teal'c said, "Tan Macri died, saving my life. I am growing this patch on my soul in order to honor his memory." Carter nodded. Then she pulled out her mini-computer. "I think I may have found a way to build my waveform modulator. Apparently, years ago, someone experimented with making a sonic weapon that he wanted to sell to the peace officers. But he never was able to properly weaponize it. He just made a gun that makes a subsonic noise that might give a few people a headache." "How does that assist in your endeavor, Major Carter?" "It's a delivery system I need. I've already got a power source and something I think I can convert into a dimensional shifter like the one in the quantum mirror. I should be able to get this together in the next week or so." "I am grateful to hear that, Major Carter." "Yeah." She sat down on the couch. "I just hope I still have access to the Institute for that long." Then she told Teal'c about Counselor Ain. It would seem that Counselor Kif was not the only opponent to the machine. "No, and it's ridiculous. It's like those people back on Earth who dismiss evolution by saying it's just a theory. Theory isn't just anything. It's a conclusion based on detailed, hard data that has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb. But the only evidence Ain will accept is an actual disaster." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant." "You may rant all you wish, Major Carter." She smiled. "Thanks, Teal'c. Truly, I don't think I'd have gotten through this without you. You would not have been in this situation were it not for me, as it was I who chose to dial this world." "True." She got up from the couch. "I'm going to take a bath." Another technological invention that had passed by this world was the shower. But they valued baths quite a bit, and tonight, Carter definitely needed one. Ain observed Narda and Carter for 2 months. During those 8 weeks, Carter and Narda managed to find a way to streamline the geothermal tap's work, and for the first time in years, decrease the power used by the machine. That, if nothing else, did a great deal to shut Ain up, which made everyone happy. Well, except Ain, but few in the Science Institute were all that concerned with the counselor's happiness. In her spare time, Carter also finished constructing the prototype for a temporal waveform modulator. Her military training forced her to give it a designation, and she went with TWM-1. When she got to the top of the mountain, she saw that O'Neill was not only upright, but also staring angrily at a spot where there wasn't anything she could see. "Why is O'Neill staring at the air?" Teal'c asked her. And then Carter saw it, or, rather, didn't see it. "Where's Thor's pod?" "Perhaps it moved through the field into the same time stream that we occupy." Carter shook her head. "It hasn't been long enough. The anti-grav units on that pod kept it slow-moving for Thor's health. It can't have moved to the force shield in the time since we've gone through it. Besides, if it had gone through, the Colonel would have chased it." "Indeed." Teal'c raised his eyebrow. "Perhaps the Asgard were able to locate Thor and transport him to their ship." "And not take the Colonel?" Carter sighed. "Well, let's test the TWM-1 and maybe we can ask him." She fired the converted sonic pistol at the force shield and then picked up the test object, her safety goggles. The goggles bounced off the force field just as the bullets had that first time. Damn it! She tried 3 other settings on the TWM-1, but none of them worked. The sonic pistol design was for only 4 settings, and changing that wasn't really practical. Carter frowned. "I thought I found the right range of wave modulations to make this work." She stared at O'Neill, still standing with his mouth open in a look of grumpiness. "Maybe I have the time ratios wrong. I need to get back and try another..." Her musing was interrupted by the ground shaking beneath her feet. "What the hell?" She lost her footing, but Teal'c reached out to grab her arm and steady her. But then another quake hit, twice as rough as the first one. Pulling out her binoculars, Carter glanced down at the city to find that the machine's lights had gone dark. "I don't believe it. Some idiot turned the machine off." And she had a pretty good idea who the idiot in question was. Another quake, and this time Carter and Teal'c both fell to the ground. Luckily, they were high enough up the mountain that there was very little danger of anything falling on their heads. That was the final quake, and Carter again peered through the binoculars. The machine's lights were coming back on. "Come on, Teal'c, we have to get down there." Indeed. By the time they finished the long trek down the mountain, the peace officers and medical personnel had things mostly under control. They still provided assistance, Teal'c's strength and observational ability, and Carter's field medical training proving beneficial. Carter finally made it to the Science Institute after nightfall. Nardo was there drinking something alcoholic. "Carter, where the hell have you been?" "I told you I was..." Nardo waved her off. Her brief moment of anger burned to ashes. Right. Up the mountain, testing your new toy. Sorry, it's been a bad day." "We had a power outage. Apparently, Ain saw that we had reduced the power needs for the machine, so he had the council authorize less power for the machine overall. But he got the figures wrong, of course, and it took too much away, so the machine shut down." After gulping down some of her drink, Nardo added, "The good news is, Ain has his proof now that the machine is vital. With any luck, he'll recommend that we keep the machine going." "Oh, with any luck. Have any more of that?" Smiling, Nardo poured another glass of the drink, which Carter recalled was named Yerez. Then a buzzing noise interrupted them. Nardo put a communications device to her throat. "Yes?"
10 Nardo, this is Officer Ham Solvig. I'm afraid that we have some bad news. I believe you were searching for Counselor Ain Anred."
"Yes, I was concerned about his well-being." That surprised Carter, but then something bad happening to the counselor would probably translate to something bad happening to the Science Institute.
"His well-being is quite poor, I'm afraid,"
Ham said.
"He's dead."
Carter's second time experiencing an inquest was more exciting than the last, but it also made her realize how much better boring was in the grand scheme of things. One counselor testified,
"According to Counselor Ain's reports, the staff at the Science Institute was abusive toward him. More than once, he felt that his life was in danger."
An aide to the council, who wore a topknot but one that was much shorter than those of the counselor, said, "I reviewed Counselor Ain's figures, and they were enough to cause the machine to shut down from lack of power. The counselor told me that they were the figures provided by Tan Narda and the alien woman. I believe that Tan Narda and her colleagues deliberately had Ain be responsible for the temporary deactivation of the machine so that they could make him look foolish." Narda muttered to Carter in the gallery. "No, the universe made him look foolish." Carter snorted in agreement. The testimony continued in that vein, with only Narda herself providing the truth. "The figures we supplied to the counselor were correct and would not have shut down the machine. But while I'm sure that Ain Anred had many virtues, a head for mathematics was not one of them. He barely understood the principles that Sam Carter and I laid out for him. It's not a surprise that he got the numbers wrong. Counselors, I am sorry for what has happened, but it was an accident. and this accident has also proven how necessary the machine is. After all the testimony was taken, Counselor Wren said,
The Council will deliberate and take into full consideration the testimony given today, as well as the allegations of manipulation of data. We will render the rulings of this inquest tomorrow.
The crowd filed out of the government building, and as soon as they got outside, Narda turned to Carter and Teal'c. How close are you to getting through to the ring? After glancing at Teal'c, Carter said, I've readjusted the TWM-1 to 4 new possible waveforms. I think it stands a good chance of working this time. Then go. Go up to the mountain at first light, go through, because I can guarantee that based on Wren's tone, the Council is not going to be favorable toward us. Carter hesitated. Narda, we can't just... Yes, you can go. You need to go. This isn't your world. This isn't your fight. It's mine. I appreciate the help you've given me, but I think this last incident will bring a lot of good work to an end. Narda, I know. Carter, no goodbyes. I've already said goodbye to my brother unwillingly. I won't do it for the pair of you. Just go. The next morning, Carter and Teal'c put on the fatigues that they'd been wearing when they boarded the Ballistener. Neither of them had said they were going to do it, and Carter wasn't surprised that Teal'c was thinking the same thing as her. They also made sure to grab plenty of food and drink in case they did make it through. O'Neill will, I suspect, prefer these to boysenberries, Teal'c said. Indeed, Carter said with a smile. As they reached the plateau on the mountain, Carter saw that O'Neill hadn't changed position, but he had closed his mouth. She tried the first setting, tossed the goggles. Nothing. Then the second setting. On the third setting, the goggles flew through but hovered in midair as soon as they crossed the event horizon. And then the ground started to shake far more violently. The very rock of the mountain started to split apart, and Carter and Teal'c both fell to the ground. Teal'c shouted over the din of the quaking earth. We must go through, Major Carter. Her first thought was of Narda and Zerael, but her next was that she didn't want to die on this time-displaced mountain, and the quakes were getting more intense, no doubt in response to the lessened influence of the machine. So she dove toward the plateau at the same time that Teal'c did. This time, her shoulder roll was perfect. There you are! O'Neill cried. First Teal'c disappears, then you disappear, Carter, then the Asgard come and take Thor away, then you come back. He frowned. What happened to your hair? Carter blew out of breath. It's a long story, sir. She glanced over at Teal'c. However, the Jaffa was staring at Carter's hands. Where is the TWM-1? The what? O'Neill asked, legitimately confused. Glancing around the clearing, Carter saw no sign of it. Damn it! I must have dropped it on the other side. I was hoping to go back, but without the TWM-1... Might it still be on the other side? With those quakes? There's no guarantee it'll still be there. And besides, it's been years now. His hands at his temples as if to stave off a headache, O'Neill asked, Will someone please tell me what the hell is going on? Teal'c, why do you have a soul patch? As Major Carter said, O'Neill, it is a long story. Well, we've got plenty of time, O'Neill snapped. I'd kind of like to hear it. Yeah, we have plenty of time. Carter glanced back at the mountain with a heavy heart. For each of the next 6 days, SG-1 continued to dial Earth, only to have the wormhole fail to engage. In the interim, they also used some rocks on the plateau to create a makeshift staircase so they could approach the Stargate without clambering up the bottom of the circle. By the 5th day, Carter was fully convinced that the SGC hadn't read her instructions on the computer or didn't look for them until it was too late. Over that time, Carter noted that the topography of the ground around them changed subtly. And then, 6 days after Carter and Teal'c returned, there was a glow around the perimeter of the plateau. Suddenly, 2 women were standing on the other side of the force shield. We did it! One woman cried. They're still here, the other said. You've been here for a week? We thought the ring was a portal to another world. Shouldn't you have left by now? O'Neill said, I don't know, sir. Carter said, genuinely confused. It should have been the better part of a century since they were in the city. You two must be Sam Carter and Teal'c. The second woman said, wow, I really thought you'd be taller. Carter frowned. Who are you? I'm Ellison, and this is Freygar. We're scientists, and I have to say it's a great honor to meet you, Sam Carter. When we found records of your work in the ruins of the old city, specifically of the TWM-1, it was the breakthrough we were looking for. We finally were able to work out a way to stabilize the planet. You mean the whole planet is on the same stream now? Ellison nodded. Yes! Oh, I'm so glad you're still here. We have to go back and report our findings, but we'd love to stay in touch with you now that we can reach the ring. Frhagar started moving back to the mountain. We'll be back soon. Please, don't go anywhere. O'Neill stared down at Carter. You look sad, Carter. You do realize that those two women just saved their planet from likely destruction thanks in part from your notes, right? I guess. It's just... She trailed off. Teal'c came to her rescue. Elasan mentioned the ruins of the old city. That can only mean that the city in which we resided has been destroyed. Carter added, which means that Narda and Zerael are dead. And the city was probably destroyed right after we came back through here because the council turned the machine off. She shook her head. Such a waste. O'Neill put a hand on her shoulder. It's been, what, 100 years or so since you left? Good chance those two would have been dead by now no matter what. I suppose, sir. Look at it this way. Thanks to you two, SG-1 has saved 2 planets in 1 week. Assuming, Teal'c said, that we did succeed in our mission, it is possible that we have been unable to dial Earth because your homeworld has been destroyed. Thanks, Teal'c, O'Neill said with a sigh. Nice job helping me with the cheering up. Elasan and Frege did return, and Carter's hypothesis was confirmed. The Council had shut off the machine, and the resultant earthquakes destroyed the city. The geologic disasters spread to other parts of the world, and they traced it to this mountain. Finding Carter's research in the ruins led to them understanding the temporal disturbance. They used Carter's notes on time dilation, on the Stargate's solar flare-related time travel capability, and on the quantum mirror that all accompany the TWM-1 specs to help them guide them in the right direction toward bringing the planet back into temporal alignment. It helped that they'd been doing their own experiments with temporal physics as well. All this meant that P4X-234 now moved at the same speed throughout time as the rest of the galaxy. We'll have to send a team back at some point, Carter said, and try to find out what it was that slowed time down on the planet in the first place. It's got to be technological, but we never were able to find the source. Some other time, Carter, O'Neill said. Right now, it's time to futilely dial the gate again. Just as he had 4 times a day, every day, since arriving at P4X-234, O'Neill dialed the 6 chevrons that corresponded to Earth, and the 7th chevron that was the symbol for P4X-234, the point of origin. But this time, the wormhole engaged. Carter almost didn't believe it when she saw it. She fumbled for her GDO to transmit SG-1's identification code so they would open the iris. About time, O'Neill said. I could use a shower. With feeling, Teal'c said, Indeed. Carter smiled, and the 3 of them walked up the makeshift rock staircase and through the gate. As soon as they materialized on the ramp, greeted by General Hammond, Daniel Jackson, and a bunch of airmen, O'Neill said without preamble, Well, it's about time! The end. Again, that story appears in Far Horizons, a Stargate SG-1 / Stargate Atlantis anthology published by Fandemonium Books. You can find it online at your usual book dealers, as well as my various other bits of Stargate fiction, including Homeworlds, which I also have a story in, and Kali's Wrath, which is my Stargate novel. An SG-1 novel took place during the 5th season. Sunbreaker, which appears in Homeworlds, is also a Carter and Teal'c-focused story. That one takes place after the show is over, and I may read that in a future KRAD COVID reading. And Kali's Wrath involves the Ghoul named Kali, who appeared briefly in a 2-part 5th season episode, but was never seen again, so I fleshed her out a little bit. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Check me out online at DeCandido.net, at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and at patreon.com/KRAD. If you support me on Patreon, you get to read all sorts of cool stuff that you can't get anywhere else. So you should go there and support it. Anyway, thank you very much, and please stay safe.